Thank you so much, Franz. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you to all of you to be here. I'm sorry that I am presenting in English and my Spanish is too bad to be up to the challenge of presenting. So thank you so much for understanding. As Franz said, my name is Fabiola Iannarilli. I am a postdoc associate at the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change, and I am also associate at the Max Planck Yale Center for Biodiversity Movement and Global Change. So I am located in Connecticut, US. Today I'm going to present the work that we have been done in the past few months in collaboration with Expantia for the Wildlife Insight platform. We are going to talk about camera traps and how we can use camera trap data to preserve biodiversity. And so, okay. And so we are going to cover a little bit what camera trap data are, what we can learn using these tools, what type of data we are collecting, what are the issues related to this data, what is the Wildlife Insight platform, and what we did to streamline this camera trap data analysis. But before jumping into this, I want to go back 1 second to the title of this presentation, and in particular to the last part, to preserve biodiversity, to explain a little bit why what we are trying to do is important. So I think we are all familiar now with concepts like climate change, habitat degradation, pollution, invasive species, overexploitation. These are all threats to the biodiversity. So all things that are bringing us to lose species, to lose wildlife species. And we are familiar with this concept. What maybe is less common to hear is that over the years, the area over which these threats have had an effect it's becoming larger and larger. And so right now we are facing problems like climate change and change to land use that are over large scale in space and time. And so we need to solution at large scale in space and time. So we need to base those solutions on collaboration between NGOs and countries. So, and over the years, the reason why we justify the preservation of the conservation of biodiversity had changed a little bit over time. We gone from the idea to preserve some piece of land for hunting and fishing, like it was a common idea in North America, to more efforts focused on single species and then over community. And right now, we are more focused on preserving biodiversity because of the service, the ecosystem service that the biodiversity can provide us. For example, we have bees that pollinate many of the species that from which we get our food sources. Or we have like soil microorganisms that help regenerate the soil for agriculture. Or we have like tree and plant that provide oxygen for us. But I personally think that the reason why we have to preserve biodiversity is because we are interconnected with nature in a lot of different ways. And so when we start to lose species as we are right now, at some point, everything will crumble down, and we are already seeing some of the effects. So to preserve biodiversity, what we need to know is where the species are, where they are on a map, what are their preferences. So for example, in terms of habitat and in terms of prey, and how this population are doing. So is the population going up, going down? And that's where camera trap come in. So camera trap are devices similar to the camera that are on our phone. They are digital camera, but the difference is that in camera traps, we have a sensor that it's able to detect changes in the temperature in front of the camera. And when this change in heat in front of the camera is paired with a movement, the camera triggers and gets a picture like the one that we can see on top here in this panel. So biologists, researchers, wildlife biologists go out in the field, place camera on the landscape for a certain amount of time, and then they go back and they retrieve the camera and get a picture like this one. So what information can we get from this data? What can we learn from camera traps? Again, we can learn information about where the species are, so their distribution and the probability that these species are present on a certain place. Things about their behavior, so their preference related to time, when they are more active during the day. What is the abundance of the species over space, and so abundance and density. And one of the things that sets camera trap apart compared to other methods that are used in ecology is that camera trap also allow to have a snapshot of what are the species present in a certain area. So now the concept of camera trap is not really new. The first camera trap picture was taken by George Shiras III at the beginning of the last century. It was actually published in National Geographic in 1906. And this one was a little bit different from the one, it didn't have a sensor. Of course, it was not digital, but the principle was the same. The animal going around trigger a line that led the camera to take a picture. So the concept is the same. What has changed over time, and especially in the last 2 decades, is that the technological advancement that camera trap have been gone through now allow us to leave this camera out for a long period of time in very remote area. For example, just think about the change that we had from going to film to SD cards. We went from like getting 24, 36 stop picture in one camera, in one roll, to now getting up to 30,000 picture in just one camera trap, an SD card. So we now have the power to use camera trap to monitor biodiversity, to monitor wildlife in remote area for a long period of time, because we can like go to places that are hard to access, leave the camera there for 6 months, and then come back and retrieve the camera and get information about the species that are there. This also allows to study species that are cryptic and more rare, and species that tend to avoid humans. So what type of data we collect and what are the issues? I think the best way to think about the type of data that we collect, it's also to think about how we go from collecting the data to using the data. And so the first step is, of course, as we have already said, it's data collection. And I think at the moment, actually, in the world, we collected like millions of pictures each year. And I think the number is so big that it's hard to actually quantify. To give you a little bit of an example, for my PhD, I used to sample in northern Minnesota, so US again. And each session, a sampling session, I was going out, placing the camera at 100 locations for 6 weeks. And at the end of the 6 weeks, I was going back and get the camera and the SD card. And I was going back to the lab with like 300, 400,000 pictures for just 6 weeks. So that's a lot of picture. So the next thing, the next step in the process is to actually go through all those pictures. And so we have to go from picture to actual records. And the most basic information that we have, it's information about, for example, a unique identifier for each picture. So if we want, we can go back and identify and check again the picture. Information about the project those picture belongs to, information about where the picture has been collected, the species present, and we usually in Wildlife Insight at least we use a unique ID for each species, and then information about the time, the day and time during the day in which the species was taken. But then we also need to have information about other things. For example, we need information about the sampling design, in particular where the project, the deployment started, when the camera were put in the field and when they were retrieved, because we will need this information for along the road for further analysis. And we also need to keep track of other information, for example, which species we have detected, what are the features of those species, for example, which genus, family, order, and class they belong to, but also their conservation status. So we don't need only to manage a large amount of data, we also need tools to manage metadata. And not all the people that are collecting camera trap have like access to those skill or those. Then we have the next step, that is the data analysis. And so again, we have these records, and based on the goal that we have for our analysis, we have to reorganize, reformat those data in a specific way. For example, let's say we want to focus on occupancy, so the probability that the species is there. We have to format the data in a way in which we have sites, we have to create a matrix of detection on detection for each species, in which on the row we have the information about the site, and on the column we have information about the day. And this value codes either if the species was detected in a certain day at a certain size, so we use 1 for that. If the species was not detected, we use a 0. And if the camera was not active there, we use NA, missing data. If we instead we want to estimate the density, so the number of individuals in a certain place, we need to create a matrix of capture history matrix. So for each species again, in which this matrix is similar to the one before, but this time in the row, instead of like having the sites, we have the individual. So we need to be able to identify the single individual in each picture. People used to do this by hand or building like pivot table in Excel. Luckily for us right now, there is like a great R package that do that. We have just to provide again the record information and information about the beginning and the end of the sampling at each site. So we are set by in that regards. But we also need to account for the structure of this data. So we need to think that, and we need to take into account some statistical consideration. For example, these cameras are active 24/7, and once the species are in front of the camera, they can stick around in front of the camera for like quite a long time. For example, in my study, in my dissertation, we had black bear that were kind of attracted to the bait that we were using, so they used to stick around even up to 10 minutes. And so in those 10 minutes, we were going to like record 1,200 pictures. And then maybe during the one day we had like a raccoon showing up for 30 seconds and we were collecting 15 pictures, and again later and again later. And so if we just look at the number of pictures, we have something, a ratio that is 1,200 to 120. So we can think that the bear actually used the site 10,000 more than the raccoon, when actually we have the raccoon that visits the site 3 times in a day. So the reason is that this picture are actually just one single event. So they are strongly correlated, and we have to take into account that. Otherwise, our estimate will be biased. The second things, for example, to consider is that species like wildlife, animals are a little bit like us. They prefer to be active at certain time of the day. So let's say for the ocelot, if we detect an ocelot 1 at night, 1 o'clock at night, today, it's very likely that we are going to detect this ocelot again tomorrow at 1 o'clock at night. And we have again to consider this periodicity in the activity in the analysis. So to analyze this data, we need some level of expertise on top of the one for processing the data. And again, the next step is sharing the results. So we need like skills to plot and visualize the results. And last but not the least, we also need tool to share the data in a way that can be easily integrated with other data sets. So we need like common metadata information. And so, and one of the most common problem in this pipeline that goes from data collection to in these pipelines that brings the camera trap information from the field work to a global repository that can help our decision as conservation biologists at large scale is that many of these data end up in an hard drive somewhere in a desk, maybe in the office of a ranger or somewhere where they get lost. So we need something that helps with the sharing with this information. And that's where Wildlife Insight comes in. Wildlife Insight is a online platform with the goal of helping camera trappers all over the world to really harness the potential of camera trap data to conserve biodiversity. And the initiative has been born by the partnership of 8 different organizations, and we have organizations that are NGOs like Conservation International, Wildlife Conservation Society, WWF. We have some organizations that are more academic based, like the North Carolina Museum of Natural Science, the Smithsonian Institution. And then we have, and the Map of Life that is associated with my lab. And then we have other partners like Google that provides technical support. And then, of course, we have supporters that help carrying out the initiative. And this is just a screenshot of the projects that are already on the website. The website is wildlifeinsight.org. And at the moment, there are, 2 days ago, actually, there are around 8 million pictures. And actually, the number is growing day by day because we are now in a phase in which we are bringing in the data from the partners, and we hope to open the system to the public before the summer. And so right now we have data on more than 800 species, and not surprising, most of them are birds and mammals, because that has been the focus so far for camera trap sampling, mostly terrestrial vertebrates. But things are changing, and we are seeing more study on reptile and amphibian as well, even like insects. So that will be amazing. It will be very interesting. And the way in which Wildlife Insight helps the process is through supporting the camera trapper practitioner in every different step. So, for example, Wildlife Insight provides a tool for applying artificial intelligence for species identification. And a team in Google is actually leading this part of the project. And they are working with bounding boxes. And it's very interesting because if you go on the website, you can actually see the precision for each species that you may be interested in. And what I would like to highlight is that even like removing all the empty picture, the blanks in the data set is already like can help you a lot, given that usually 60% of the picture that you collect are like empty picture. And so here we have actually a precision that it's more than 97%. And this has been estimated to be very similar to what a human can do. So this is, I think it's very impressive and can really speed up the processing stage. Then, of course, we are building infrastructure to help user with analysis and that infrastructure that help user visualizing pattern and results. And then the wildlife infrastructure also has functionality for improving the data quality. For example, when the user is uploading the data, there are like tests to check, for example, if all the records belonging to a certain location are within the time frame in which the camera was active at that location. This is a few screenshots of the actual Wildlife Insight platform right now. So this is a map of the project that a user has active. You can see the user can see their own picture. They can check the classification and or provide a classification, and then they can like see the results on a map. Sorry, this is very blurry. I didn't realize it. But so, what did we do for this in this project? We focused mostly, our work focused mostly on these two steps, the data analysis and results sharing. And so the analytical team in Wildlife Insight identify a few metrics that to start from. And some of them are related with the where, some with the what, and some with the how. And for each one of these metrics, the goal was to provide results, so numerical results, but also visual and data associated with those visual. And the reason behind this was because the goal is to provide maps and plots that user can like directly use in reports and other products that they have to present. And I think, and it's important in that case that they have access to the data behind those plots. So the challenge was to go from code, our code for us was to go from our code to create a product that can work in an API. And we worked with Expantia, and we extended a framework that they suggested at the beginning of the project. So for every API, the workflow was this. In the first week, I was creating the code and calculating the metric, the code to calculate the metric. So producing some numeric results and producing some plots and maps. Then I was creating an R-Shiny app to use as a mock-up version of what will be in the future in the website. And then we were sharing that mock-up R-Shiny version to a set of selected user and a scientific committee within Wildlife, and they were providing a suggestion. Second week, I was going to review the code based on their suggestion. For example, they maybe will ask for filter for specific species or specific time frame. And so I was like finalizing the code based on their suggestion. At the beginning of the third week, I was going to share, I usually share my code with Expantia. And then in 2 weeks, they were going to, rewrite the code using Plumber, building documentation using Swagger, and then building the API using Docker and Google Cloud Run. Last step was to actually test the API. So on the Wildlife Insight side, the scientific team were testing the API to check that the output of the API was actually the expected output. And so we repeated this for the 5-6 API that we built. And this API, the product of this API will be used in the short term here in the next few months. They will be used to build user interfaces, but we can already access those results directly just doing like an API request. So I think the main two challenges in my opinion, were for us from the scientific side was to go from a code that was usually built to run for one project to build a code that was actually ready to handle any kind of project, any kind of data set. So And if you regularly work with data, you know that if you are working with a specific data set, you kind of know the ins and outs of it. So if there is a specific problem, you can handle it and you can understand what is the problem and how to solve it. But if you have to apply the same code to many different data sets, you need to build some tests and check to be sure that, and to consider, you have to sit down and consider all the different possibilities. That again, so we needed to include in the codes checks, like, for example, again, to check that all the records for a certain project were within the time frame that were supposed to be, and things like that. So this was on the R coding part. From the infrastructure side, I think one of the main challenge was to create a code that was able to produce results in a quick way, to be sure that the user, to provide a good experience for the website user, and to maintain a certain interactivity in the code. What's actually the analytical infrastructure? I am going to describe a little bit what the analytical infrastructure looks like. This is not my field, so I think Franz and the team at Expansia will actually describe this better, but I will give it a try. So the first step was for a typical user, Wildlife Insight user, has to access to the website, and so they have to identify themselves. And so we build an authentication system. And when I say build, when I say we, it's not me. It's actually the tech team at Wildlife Insight with collaborating with Franz and the others. So they build, they build an authentication system. And so once the user was authenticated, he can access to the real wildlife infrastructure, Wildlife Insight infrastructure, where there were like the API that we produce. So the way it works, the user makes a call to a certain API. The API accesses the database and retrieves the data that the user can access to, so the data from his own project. And so the data is sent back to the API does the calculation, and finally the the results are going back to the user. This works quite well for the first two API that we created for activity pattern and detection rates, because they are fairly easy to calculate. So we can do that directly. But when we move to the next, so to the one on the bottom, the next series, the next set of API, we had to face a set of different challenges. The first one was that these three API are actually connected. So the sum of the product of the wildlife picture index and the species richness are actually dependent on products of the occupancy model, the occupancy API. The second thing was that the occupancy, producing the results for occupancy, that's meant for occupancy, it's actually computational demanding. And so it took a really long time. Third was that the occupancy model needed to be run in a Bayesian framework. So if you're familiar with that, we needed a different, that rely on a different language, on the JAX language. So we needed to have an infrastructure that handles that. So we decided to build an additional API that we call JAX. And the way it works is that the JAX API regularly, let's say every day, access the database and run the JAX model for all the projects that we have. And then it stores those data, those results in a different database. When the user make a request to one of the three API on the bottom, let's say the occupancy one, the occupancy API will go to the database, retrieve the estimates, and then those data will be then reworked, like in the occupancy API, to produce, let's say, for example, a plot. And then the plot will be returned to the user. So putting everything together, this is a little a little overview of the structure that is actually now in the wildlife analytics. So user can actually very easily, with a few clicks, will be in the future, in the next future, very easily access to the results through pushing a little few buttons, but this is all what is going on behind the scene. And to give you a little bit of an overview of what are the products of our work, we have like from plot data, rows plot, of activity maps, trends over time in a species, in occupants in detection, or for all the species in the community. We have the trend in the overall community, so it's the community doing well, it's not, and again for the whole community and for the each species. And then, for example, for species richness, we have maps or the number of species detected at each location, but also estimates of the number of species present. And as I said before, some of these metrics can be calculated in R using a package that are already present. And these are the package that we use for activity pattern. We use activity and overlap. For the occupancy analysis, because we needed to run that in JAX, we use the JAX UI. For the species richness, the estimated species richness to be correct, we use the vegan package. And this is like an example of what the website will look like in the future based on one of the Shiny app I built during the project for activity pattern and for detection rates. And all the API have documentation on the GitHub page and in the Swagger page. And so I want to say that this was not an easy project because we had a very short timeline to work on all these API. And it was not easy to like build the code, build the API, build the infrastructure in such a short term of time, because we did all of this in 3.5 months. And so I think I really want to thank Expantia, all the team, Franz, Patrick, Ronnie, and Magdiel for their work. They are being like great, and absolutely we couldn't have done that without them. I want to thank you all the partner and the supporter at Wildlife Insight, and in particular Eric Fegra, Jorge Haumada, and Nicole Flores for their work, and my lab and my group for their support. And if you want to shoot me an email, and if you have other questions, those are my contacts, and I am available to take any question if there are any. Thank you so much.
Fabiola, thank you for a great, great talk. I joined Mauro with the applause. It was fantastic. Are there any questions? Y si hay preguntas que quieran que ayude a traducir, con muchísimo gusto.
I think I can understand Spanish enough. I cannot speak it. Sorry.
Very good. Entonces, any questions in Spanish are valid?
Fabiola.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Eric, and I'm really, that was a really great talk. I'm just, I have a questions about the models. Why you use JAX and no other language?
So there are actually a few packages now, like the marked package that run the same model, but we decided to use a hierarchical community model. So that requires a lot of different level, and it was easier to handle in JAX. So we use code that is actually already published from other author. Even if we kept for this first version the model quite easy, it was still quite challenging to, and it wasn't really a model that can be easily adapted in a fragmentist way. That's why we went with the JAX, with the Bayesian version of it.
Mauro, go.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the talk and also thank Franz for highlighting this talk. He promised that it would be extremely exciting for me, and it was that and much more. I'm very sorry that I joined late and I have way too many questions, so I have to pick, I guess one that is more relevant to my current work, which is in the interface between basically building infrastructure for researchers. So in that, I acknowledge that projects that researchers have grow organically. And then when you want to put a product in production like you're doing now, you're faced with that challenge that you did explicitly say was one of those challenges, right? How to refactor that code so that it works in a way that scales up well.
Yep.
I just want to hear some more details, if you could, about what that process was. And the question comes from my frustration in trying to help the teams that I work with, and sometimes finding that the mess is so great that the morale in the whole team is kind of down to the floor.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge. And the way I approached it was first to build a code that was working with a test data set, and then to test that code on as many projects as I could. Because the data that we have here comes from so different sources. Even if they are basically camera trap data, they come from so many different sources, so many different projects that have been collected for so many different reasons that it's hard to predict the behavior. What you can predict are problems that are common, for example, problem in the timestamp, dates, and things that can be typo. So you can try to get to that once. To that kind of problem, but the only way I found to be effective is to test them on as many different data sets as you can. I don't know if that's really a good strategy. This was my first attempt working on such a big project. In the past, I usually work just on a data set. This is the first time I have to work on a data set that it's made of different data sets. So I am learning. I don't feel like I am an expert to share. I can just share my experience, I think.
Sorry if I would love to kind of follow up a little bit, just one more second, Franz, if that's okay. I want to know where you're starting from, because I understand, the challenge of refactoring depends a lot, of how big is the mess that you start from, right? So can you, sorry if you said this in the beginning, but can you explain a little bit, how you organize your own research before, you were faced with this super large project? What habits did you develop so that you could, I know that it probably felt frustrating for you, but the fact that you were able to put this in production in 3 months and a half, no matter how much engineer effort you had, it's pretty striking to me. We have been dealing with, for years, probably this organization has been dealing with mess. So I'd love to kind of try and understand, what was your base? What was your starting point?
I was already
project.
Yeah. What I can say, I was already quite familiar with all the code that we were creating. So I had just to go through the last bit of the process. That was the scaling up of the code. But many of the tools many of the package that we used, I already had used that quite extensively in the past, because for my PhD, I worked with the same kind of data. So that helped a lot to process. Not surprising, I struggled a little bit with the one I was less familiar with. So I think having already a good understanding of what you are creating, like on a small scale, it's easier when you have to scale up.
Thank you, Mauro. Anybody else? No? Because Mauro, if you have more questions, please, take the floor. I think the discussion is very, very interesting.
I know that many of the people in this room also have some interest in kind of workflows. So before I kind of jump to other kind of higher level, and I have questions about pricing founds, questions about community, social aspects in kind of convincing people that the way to go is to hire expantia or like people that act professionals and not, as we are when we're doing our PhDs or postdoc, you want to do everything from end to end, and it's just not feasible. But let's start from that. Can you describe what was your workflow before? I mean, were you someone that could, for example, restart your session every time, before you run your scripts, or would you, be creating packages for yourself, or would you, separate functions that are reusable pieces of your code from analysis code that executes those functions? I would love to hear a little bit of, how a researcher that really knows what she's doing goes about working.
Yeah. Yes, I can share a little bit. Usually when I start a new project, I usually start looking at the data that I have and to see if the question that I want to answer actually makes sense for those data, because you cannot answer all the question with that. What I then start to do is, let's say I have to build a model. I start from the simplest version of the model I can think about. And then I try to build on that model. Once like the simple version works, I try to add a new layer of complexity. And it's a kind of a loop that I go through different steps. And of course, when I am kind of stuck on something that I am facing for the first time or something that I don't know, the only thing that I can do is think about it and research on it. And then I spend most of my day when I am programming, like on Googling stuff, because I think that's the only way to go around problem when you are programming. Is that what you were hoping to get?
Anything. I mean, I love the idea of you somehow noticing what do you think that has determined in a way your success. Different people, it's like a reviewer on a paper, different people see different things in the paper. So I love to hear whatever you have to offer. But I would like to hear a little bit, what was the experience, Franz, for you to work with Fabiola? Can you explain from your perspective as an engineer and researcher yourself?
I think that the overarching feeling that we had in the team is that we were very happy to work with Fabiola, because she has a very, I think, she delivers very structured code. So we think she has a very organized mind, right? And she knows her code really well. So it's expressive, it's well structured, and when we have a question, she can go right to where the problem lies. To work with somebody like that is a pleasure for engineers, obviously, right? Because we can iterate very quickly. And I think that if anything, that was a key thing to helping us being successful in bringing this to production. So maybe with that, because you're looking for workflow, Mauro, we talked a lot. Right? And we talked a lot in formal structures. So before we started the project, we as Expantia thought about the structures through which we would talk, and then make notes of what we were going through with Fabiola and her team. And we stuck to that, right? Yeah. So we talked a lot, we wrote down a lot, we had a lot of iterations on the documentation. And the documentation in words and images was instrumental in being able to do the iterations on the code and infrastructure. And I think that part, it was a lot of fun. It was a bit scary at the beginning, like, oh, is this going to work? But it worked, and both sides of the equation took it up quite nicely. And I think that was also helped a lot. Don't you think, Fabiola?
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree, and the feeling is absolutely mutual. I think the back and forth was instrumental on making this happen, because I am like a biologist, so I don't know how the code should look for an infrastructure, how to optimize the code for an infrastructure like this. And the team actually, they are very well versed in biology, but maybe not with the coding that we were using. So it was a very, the going back and forth, it was very, again, instrumental on making this happen. We had regular meeting, very structured. Franz brought us all this structure, this documentation, and we were very happy to fall in the line and follow the methods that he was suggesting, because it worked. It worked even for us as a team in the Wildlife Insight to go through those processes, because there were things that we weren't thinking. And when we were discussing with the Expantia in those weekly meetings at the beginning of the project, we were like, oh, that's true. We have to think about that. We have to consider that. We have to give the user this option. So it was very helpful. Absolutely.
Who is we when you use the plural? Who else is in your team from the research side?
The people that are actually listed in the Jorge Haumeda is actually from Colombia, so she's very active in the Latin American ecological community. Eric Fegras, they are both a Conservation International. Eric is the tech lead for the Wildlife Insight initiative, so he worked closely with France to organize the infrastructure.
Okay, so now, Mauro, I'm going to give a little bit of space for some other questions. Magdiel, you have a question.
Yes, I just was wondering, Fabiola, how the issue of identifying the animal works. Is that done in R? Is there a package or a library that do that, or how that works?
So I am not, so the Wildlife Insight initiative is so large that I am not up to date with everything. I don't know exactly what the team is using. I think they are using something in the background. Not sure about what it is, but I know that there are art packages that have been developed for that. And you can either, if you have a species for which they have already trained the model, you can use those models that are already published. Otherwise, there is at least one package that I kind of worked with a little bit of it. That it's called MLWIIC. That package, you can input your own data if you have data that are already annotated, labeled, and you can build your own model. You can train your own model for identifying future species. Future picture from of the same species. So,
Great,
Roberto.
thanks.
Hello, Fabiola. My name is Roberto Delgado. I work for Costa Rica's government, especially in the social sector, in an institution that fights against poverty here in Costa Rica. Congratulations for your talk. I consider it a world top research project. My question is related with the pipeline that you presented. I've been working in pipelines recently for a while, and I've been attracted by such structures recently. And before you develop your research, before you made all the design of your project as a whole structure, this was so difficult to design the structure of the pipeline? That's the first question. And the second one is, before you made all the way of the research, did you stop for a while to design the structure of such pipeline? I mean, in terms of where is the beginning and where am I supposed to go? Final part of the project, the results. Those are the main questions. Thank you very much for your time.
yeah, thank you for your question. So this actual structure of the pipeline, I can say it's common to any camera trap project, but deploying designing this for a large scale platform like Wildlife Insight, I think has been very challenged. I've been in the project I started this last September. to being involved closely with the project, but the initiative actually started 3 years ago. And it's still ongoing. We are not still to the point in which we are open, completely open to the public, to new user. So yes, I guess defining the pipeline was not such a problem, because again, this is very common to any camera trap project. These are the steps you have to go through from data collection to sharing your results and sharing your data. Actually build the infrastructure that allow this, it's very challenging, and we are still working on it. And like there have been like a lot of top researchers that have been doing camera trap work for a long time that are working on this, and I think that's the main strength of Wildlife Insight, that is going to be built by people that know really well the process and the type of data.
Thanks a lot.
Yep.
Any more questions? No. Fabiola, thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk. It was a great discussion. Thank you all for that. And well, we look forward to when it says 27 million. You have to come over again and tell us how that was, because, you know, 300,000 to 400,000 photos a day. Well, that is data, you know. Then
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it has been a pleasure to listen to you. Everybody, thank you very much.
Thank
We
you
have
so
this
much.
meeting. We have this meeting every last Tuesday. Every last Thursday of the month. So we hope to see you all again in February. Bye bye.